The 656th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for three. Back iron, 1 second to play, stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh, Anthony, back with you guys here on a Friday. And we got a game to talk about because, believe it or not, Carolina finally back in action on the road tomorrow at Georgia Tech. That game will come your way 2 p.m. over on the ACC network. Even though Carolina has been off all week, we have had you covered with a lot of content that has come your way. Episodes every single day. We started the week with an interview with Joel Berry. We had another installment of Ashton's analysis. We had a great interview with Shelby Swanson from the News and Observer. And then we actually did an NCAA tournament check-in on yesterday. So if you haven't done so, go back, check out all that content because we've been talking Carolina basketball here all week long. And we've got 2 episodes coming your way here on this Friday. We got to get you ready for the matchup with the Yellow Jackets. Then I'll be back later to recap Hubert Davis's press conference he held at the Dean Dome before the team departed for Atlanta. So a lot of Carolina basketball coverage coming your way. We hope that you are subscribed and locked in so you don't miss any of our coverage as we get closer and closer to March Madness. Before we get to the Georgia Tech preview, we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to Hubert H. Humphrey for that pod thought. That thought is, quote, "A smooth sea never made a skillful mariner," end quote. Our boss at WFNZ, he's got a quote up on in the side of the studio that says every season is a journey, and it's something that we should have probably used and applied when Carolina had their 0-2 stint out there in California. Instead, we did what we do best. We ranted. We overreacted, and we challenged this team to be better, and they responded. They've gone 2-0 since. That pod thought that would suggest that, look, man, even when Carolina's really, really good, you're going to have some bumps in the road. But it's supposed to make you better for the long haul. It's supposed to make you more prepared for those road games at a Duke, at an NC State, for a chance to win a conference or for the chance to play deep into the NCAA tournament. And what we're hoping is the last time we saw this team, they erased a 16-point deficit at Virginia. They come back and win, and we're hoping that's the springboard. That's the jumping off point to a strong close to the regular season. Because starting on Saturday, you've got roughly about 5.5, 6 weeks left in the regular season, where you've got big-time matchups with Duke. You got to match up with Louisville. You got to match up with State. You got to match up with Miami, Clemson, and some others. We're hoping that this is the start of Carolina making a strong push towards the end of ACC play as we begin to prepare ourselves for what's going to be, I think, as wild and eventful as an NCAA tournament we've had in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, the next two games are just a way to build off of what you did in that game against Virginia and get yourself prepared for what's going to be the most difficult games that you play all season long. Duke is the best team in this conference. We know that. They're one of the better teams in college basketball, and so Carolina is going to have to be prepared. This is where you can show that, hey, things really have turned back in the right direction. Not saying you got to manhandle these teams, not saying you got to do what you did to Notre Dame to these teams, but it would be nice to get some double-digit wins in these next two games. That's really what you're kind of hoping for if you're a Tar Heel fan. I get it. One game is on the road in a game that we're going to break down here against Georgia Tech. The other one's at home against Syracuse. But at the same time, I mean, these are games that if you are going to get to the level that we think Carolina is capable of, and we talked about it yesterday, we think this is a team that their ceiling in terms of their seed lining could be a 2 seed. And so in order to do that, these are the games that you have to be able to win. I'm interested to see what the mindset is for this group after having a week off against a weaker opponent. Do they feel like, hey, we can just roll the ball out and we're good enough to be able to win? Or did they sort of learn from some of their other adventures through the ACC? And that's the thing. You're right. Smooth seas are not going to make a skilled mariner or mariner, whichever way you pronounce it. I think it's you need some of those bumps in the road. You need some of those rough seas in order to teach you the things that you need to know. So hopefully this is a group that really learned a lot when they were out on the West Coast. They don't take this Georgia Tech team lightly, and they come in and get ready to lay a beat down on the Yellow Jackets.
Give you a little preview of what the tone is going to be from Hubert Davis and the press conference recap that I'm doing later today. I think you could tell there's a mind shift switch with him. He knows what the calendar reads. It's January 30th. He understands that the schedule is about to heat up. If anything, I thought he was on the attack, really challenging his team vocally in the press conference to say, hey, we still got a lot of room to grow. But if we do grow, we can be rewarded for that growth. He actually referenced the video that's going out on social media where you see Drake May on the sidelines with Josh McDaniels in the fourth quarter of Sunday's AFC title game. And Drake is telling him, hey, it's freaking hard out here, man. It's cold, it's snowy, it's windy. We can't do anything. And McDaniels tells him, you're right. But if we find a way to finish this, it'll be the most rewarding thing in your life to this point because you get to go to the Super Bowl. Well, Hubert Davis said, well, guess what? The next 2.5 months have a chance to be rewarding for a lifetime as well. That's what's ahead of you and it starts with Georgia Tech. You got to get to Syracuse on Monday, but we know what looms. We know what starts a week from Saturday, that first matchup with Duke. And from that moment on, there's going to be so much that's in front of this team that they can accomplish, that they can make memories. And we'll be interested to see how the team does respond to that vocal challenge from their head coach. Let's look at the matchup with Georgia Tech. That's the first matter of business for Carolina. They are 73-28 all time against the Yellow Jackets. They have won 4 of the last 5 matchups. In Atlanta, though, this has been a tricky place for Carolina football as well for Carolina basketball. The Heels just 23-16 all time in the ATL and 17-14 in McCamish Pavilion, including losing the last time that they played there in a game where you could argue RJ Davis got fouled on the final shot. The referee let the contact play, but Carolina blew a double-digit lead, and that was their first conference loss that season. This year's version of Georgia Tech is kind of what Georgia Tech has pretty much been the majority of my lifetime. Not very good. They are 11-10 overall on the season, just 2-6 in the league, but they are pretty good at home. They are 10-4 at the Pavilion. They do have 3 players that average double-figure scoring, led by maybe the most underrated player in the league, if you will, Kawasi Reeves, who averages 15.9 points, 4.1 rebounds, 1.5 assists. He shoots 45% from the field, 38% from 3. Lamar Washington, their most versatile player, he averages 11.7 points, 5.2 rebounds, 6 assists. He shoots 42% from the field, 31% from 3. And then Bey Ndongo, their big man on the inside, he averages 11.5 points, 8.1 rebounds, 2.1 assists. He shoots 54% from the field, 40% from 3. But this is a group that is top 5 in the league in both rebounding at 39.1 and blocks per game at 4.3. I mentioned that they're not a good basketball team. And look, when you're 11-10, 2-6 in the league, I can say that. But one thing about Georgia Tech, and this has kind of been the theme under Damon Stoudemire, their head coach, they have been competitive. They competed really hard at Duke, losing that game by 6. They lost at Miami by 10. They went on the road and beat NC State. They gave Clemson a little bit of a trouble as well. So know that this isn't a great team. This isn't a team that's going to factor into anything significant in terms of the ACC regular season, but they'll be fired up to have Carolina at home and knowing they beat them on their home floor 2 years ago. And, as Duke learned, as Duke and NC State learned, you got to be ready to go because this appears to be a team that gets up for the better teams this league has to offer.
That's the main thing, right? Is that they're not a great team, but they definitely get up for these types of games. I mean, you look, this is a team that got demolished by Pittsburgh. I mean, they lost 89-66 earlier this season to Pittsburgh. But then you look at some of these other games that they've played, and they've been really close. They win the game against NC State, a team that they had absolutely no reason to beat. And, this is a team that now I think when you look at it, yeah, there are some areas where they're not necessarily great. There's enough areas where they are good enough that they're going to challenge some of the things that we are looking at with Carolina and want to see get better. I know that Carolina has defended the 3 a lot better in the second half of each of the last 2 games. Still a team that comes in shooting 36% from beyond the arc so far this season in Georgia Tech. So if you're not careful, this is a team that can hurt you from out there as well as, some of the other teams that Carolina has been playing so far in conference play. 39.1 rebounds per game. Carolina's got to be ready to go up against one of the better rebounding teams in this conference. They just went up against the best rebounding team in the conference and got out rebounded by 16. So if Carolina's not careful, then this is going to be another game where they could get out rebounded, and that could be what allows Georgia Tech to hang around in this game or potentially even find a way to pull an upset. Team that does a good job of protecting the rim. Really, it's shocking how they've allowed 73.1 points per game, but they're 33rd in the country in terms of field goal percentage allowed. They're 69th in the country in terms of 2-point field goal percentage allowed, and they're 52nd in terms of 3-point field goal percentage allowed. The thing is that they do allow a decent number of threes to opponents, just don't allow opponents to shoot a very high clip in that area. So this is one of those teams that I think Carolina may be able to get their perimeter game going against. That's one thing that Carolina's got to look at in this game. But my point being is that, yeah, there's not that superstar player. There's not a Boopy Miller. There's not an Abuka Okori. But there are some really solid players here. Kawasi Reeves, as you mentioned, really solid player, a guy that's averaging almost 16 a game. So someone that Carolina has to make sure that they're able to take away in this game. And then Lamar Washington is their point guard. And he's a dude that, he does just about everything. He shares the ball incredibly well. He rebounds the ball very well. So Carolina's got to make sure, that was one of the issues earlier in the season or earlier in conference play here when they lost a couple of games. was that they were letting those guards, those point guards in particular, really go off. So they got to make sure that they're buttoned up in that area. But when you look at it, this is a team that Carolina should be able to beat and beat by double digits if they bring their best game to the table.
Yeah, you're not wrong. And so we're gonna see which version of Carolina do we get away from Chapel Hill. The Chapel Hill version of this team, top 5, top 10 team in college basketball. The team, when they go on the road, outside of that road win at Kentucky, they look like a tournament team, but they look much more formidable and a lot more beatable. You got to tighten that up as we get down the stretch here in ACC play. Look at the game from Carolina's perspective. The Heels bring with them a 16-4 record. They are 4-3 in the ACC. They are ranked 16th in the AP poll. Carolina, though, as I mentioned, is 2-3 away from the Smith Center so far this season. The Heels currently have 3 players that are averaging double figures in scoring, led by I said All-American, but future All-American Caleb Wilson, 19.9 points, 10.1 rebounds, 2.8 assists. He is shooting 59% from the field, 25% from 3. You got Henry Vassar. After a poor showing against Virginia, his numbers took a bit of a dip, still averaging those 16.6 rebounds or 16.6 points, 8.8 rebounds, 2 assists, while shooting an efficient 63% from the field, 47% from 3. And then Seth Trimble, the last guy to average double figures, 14.2 points, 4.1 rebounds, 3 assists. He is shooting 48% from the field, 33% from 3. Carolina is top 5 in the league in field goal percentage at 48%, top 5 in the league in rebounds at 40.1. And the Heels are 6th in the country nationally in opponent 2-point field goal percentage. Teams are shooting just 44% against Carolina from inside the 3-point line. And the Heels updated KenPom numbers. They're 29th overall in KenPom. They've got the number 20 offense at 123.2, but their defense still in the low 50s. They check in at 102.2, a chance to get that corrected going into this week's game, because I don't know how far you can play if you've got that type of defensive rating once you get into the NCAA tournament. The net, Carolina 26th. That's a big reason why they've fallen, because they haven't played this week. Georgia Tech, the 141st in the net. So Carolina has done a good job avoiding bad losses, even though this game's on the road against a team that's been competitive at times against some of the better teams this league has to offer. This would, in fact, qualify as a bad loss for Carolina if they were to fall short. Before we get to our keys to the game and make our predictions, did want to have this discussion topic, and maybe we should save it for next week, but I want to have it this week. I want to have it now, because I'm really bothered by the fact that Caleb Wilson is averaging basically 20 and 10 while shooting north of 50%. Is emerging as Carolina's best all-around player. They're starting to run their offense through him, getting the ball to him at the high post, where he's really learning how to handle double teams and make the right passes, the right reads, et cetera, et cetera. And it just feels like it's a foregone conclusion that another super scintillating freshman, Cameron Boozer at Duke, is just the ACC Player of the Year. And if you listen to a guy like Gary Parrish on the Eye on College Basketball podcast, in his mind, he's also the National Player of the Year. And look, we're going to see those two guys face off next Saturday. I cannot wait to watch those two go at it in person, because the way that they are wired, it's going to be a lot of fun watching them compete. But it just brings me to this thought that, and we had Wes Durham on the Mac and Bone show today at WFNZ, and he's reiterating the same thing I've reiterated, that Caleb Wilson is enjoying statistically the best freshman season in the history of a Carolina basketball program. But he's not even really getting the recognition that deserves. The Field of 68 still ranks him top 6 ACC or top 6 freshman in all of college basketball. If 20 and 10 and shooting 58% isn't enough to get you in the conversation to be right there for ACC Player of the Year, just what on God's green earth does Caleb Wilson have to do to really make this a conversation?
He's got to beat Cam Boozer, I think, at least in one of these games to get into that conversation, just because the thing that Boozer has that I think is going to draw a lot of people's attention is he's got not anymore, actually, as I look at it right now, not the national leader in scoring, but he's right there. That's what I think is just a little bit different from Caleb. The rebounding numbers from Caleb have come down just a little bit. He's barely averaging that double-double, so I think he's got to keep that double-double statistic up there because that's one thing that Boozer does not have in his bank as well. I think, if he wins one of the games against Boozer, then you start having the legitimate conversation of how close are these two guys in this race? Does Caleb have a legitimate shot to get it done? I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that it's over. But if you told me right now, hey, you got to pick which one of these two guys is the conference player of the year, I'm probably leaning with Cam Boozer, especially with, where Duke is at as a team as opposed to where Carolina's at. Now, Carolina is in position to be able to get to a pretty good spot. As we mentioned, they're a team that we think has the potential to eventually climb into, second or third in the ACC and be, at their height, a team that could be on that 2 line. You do that, then we're having the conversation about, is he the ACC player of the year? And I got to be honest, if you're having that conversation, you're having the conversation, is Caleb Wilson the player of the year? I know there are some other guys out there that are performing incredibly well. AJ DeBonsa, I know, is having a really strong season. Kingston Fleming at Houston. There's plenty of guys that are in that conversation nationally. But I think if you're in the same conversation with Cam Boozer, I think you are in the National Player of the Year discussion. So I think it's more than possible for Caleb to get there. These are some games where, you don't necessarily think you can help yourself. But if he puts together, some significant performances here, let's say he comes out and has 25 and 15 against Georgia Tech. Let's say he comes out and puts up 23 and 12 against Syracuse, something like that. That can start to add up and really start to build that resume a little bit more, that you're beating up on some of the lesser teams and then eventually winning some of those big games. So I think ultimately, in order to be put on that pedestal and to be right there with Cam Boozer, I think what he's going to have to do with all of the eyes of college basketball watching in that game against Duke that's coming up for Carolina on the 7th of February, I think that is what could put him firmly in that conversation.
Obviously, I think how he performs in those 2 games could tilt this conversation one way or another. And I think it's a good thing that the game kind of carries that type of weight, because we've kind of hit this part of the rivalry where some years it feels like Duke Carolina. There's some years it doesn't feel like Duke Carolina because, and it's usually been us, we haven't held up our end of the bargain being a perennial ACC threat, national title contender, so on and so forth. I still just find it, I don't want to say blasphemous, but I think it's very bothersome that we've got a guy that is doing what he's doing, and it's still a foregone conclusion that the guy 8 miles down the road is the better player. And look, if I had to assess, I've watched both of these guys play a lot. Obviously, I've seen Wilson play more. Do I think Cameron Boozer is better today? Yes, I think Cameron Boozer is a better college basketball player. You want to have the NBA conversation? I think Caleb Wilson is going to be a better NBA player than Boozer is going to be. I just feel like if someone else, if he was doing this somewhere else, I think there'd be a lot more love nationally. I don't think he'd be being ranked 6th in, a field of 68 freshman ranking. But what do you expect when Rob Doster was writing, pretty much clickbait articles about how he doesn't make layups? Maybe I'm wrong. It just, if a Carolina freshman can average 20 and 10 and fly this much under the radar, it really just begs the question, like, what does a Carolina freshman have to do to really pop again? Because, we didn't really get a chance to see Cole Anthony after, he scored 34 in his debut because of injuries. Kobe White, quite frankly, did not pop until like the second half of the year. So it wasn't like a year long where he was this great player. Caleb Wilson was the best player on this roster the second he showed up in the summer. I mean, they played 20 games. He scored 20 points or more 14 times, tying a UNC freshman record. He's going to set that record. Very good chance he sets that record tomorrow. And so it just makes me wonder if you can average basically 20 and 10 and still maybe not get the credit you deserve. Just what does a Carolina freshman have to do, a Carolina player have to do to really get the national respect that they warrant? And remember, when RJ Davis was having the best guard season a UNC guard ever had 2 years ago, it was known in the ACC. He was the ACC Player of the Year, so on and so forth. But he should have been more in the conversation for National Player of the Year. I get what Edey was doing at Purdue, what Dalton Knecht was doing at Tennessee, but you had a Carolina guard averaging over 20 points per game, and the national media was like, yeah, that guy's not really in the conversation here, despite leading his team to an ACC regular season title and a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. So we gotta change the narrative, man. I want to see our guys being talked about the way that Duke's freshmen get talked about and other freshmen around the country are getting talked about, because I think Caleb Wilson is every bit as deserving as a Boozer, Dara Peterson, DeBansa, Braylon Mullins, on and on and on. With that, let's get to the preview or our keys to the game, make our predictions, and get out of this edition of the podcast. The first thing I wrote down was the message to Hubert Davis that he had to his team when they had to come back against Virginia, which was Carolina's got to be ready to go into McCamish, 2 fists up, ready to fight. This is going to be a physical matchup. That's the way Georgia Tech plays. That's the way that they are coached. They do take on the MO of their coach. And they're going to be looking to get a win that could really salvage what's become a lost season. Or David Stoudemire could be looking for a win to secure his job security. Maybe I don't know. Just maybe throwing that out there. But Carolina's got to show up ready to fight. And hopefully the Virginia game was the final wake-up call. Man, you can't go on the road in this conference and not be ready. From the moment that ball is thrown up in the air and it's tipped, you got to be willing to fight, scratch, and claw for 40 minutes. You got to be willing to dive on the floor for loose balls. You got to be willing to get that box out. You got to be willing to communicate and fight through that ball screen so you don't give a good perimeter jump shooter, an extra 3 feet to get a shot off from the outside. I could keep going, but you get the point. This has to be a game where Carolina meets the fight from the beginning, because if Carolina shows up and they put on their boxing gloves and they punch first, they're more gifted, they're more talented, they're deeper. They can overwhelm Georgia Tech and maybe have the inverse of what happened at Virginia. Maybe they could be the ones that are building a big lead in the first half, trying to protect it into the second half.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're hoping to see from this team, because you go back to the game against Notre Dame, they weren't even really able to build a significant lead in that one. I mean, they were up 9, but at the same time, it wasn't like you felt like, oh, this game is 100% over. There was still a path, especially with how good Notre Dame was from beyond the arc, that all of a sudden they could get back into the game with a few threes. This is one of those games you want to come out and be the first ones to punch. You don't want to be the one that sustains the punch and then has to respond to it, because we saw that last year, man, and that got old really quick, where every single time Carolina was the team that would get down by a double-digit margin and then have to claw their way back into the game. Could you do that in this game? Yeah, maybe you could get away with it in this game, because Georgia Tech isn't necessarily a great team. But I don't want to be at that point, man. I want to be in control of the game from the word go, controlling the score, controlling the pace, controlling just about every aspect of the game against a team that you are superior to. So I hope that that's the mindset that Carolina takes. going into this game is let's come out and be aggressive. I think they are a team that's built to be able to do that, and we've seen that at certain times this year. But this is a game where you've got to start seeing that, because when you get to some of the games here that you have coming up, against Duke, against Miami, against NC State, you've got to be the team that's punching first. You learn that by starting to do that against some of the lesser opponents. So I'm intrigued to see how exactly Carolina handles that in this game.
The second key to the game I wrote down, you got to get Henry Vassar back on track. Part of it, give Virginia credit. They took him completely away last week. He was a non-factor. Thank God for Jared Stevenson that he showed up, played the way he played, especially in that second half where he scored 17 points in 12 minutes and really was the igniter to the comeback and helped Carolina complete the comeback. With that being said, you can't count on that production every night out. There's a reason why Jared Stevenson is been a bench player at different times this year. You need a guy that averages 16 and 8 to give you 16 and 8. And look, knowing Henry and just the guy that he is, the player that he is, the competitor that he is, he's going to be motivated to want to bounce back, because I don't think he was happy with the way he performed last week at Virginia either. If I'm Hubert Davis and I'm Carolina's coaching staff, the first couple sets, I'm running action to get Henry the ball, whether it's the top of the key for that three, whether it's getting him in the pick and roll where he can attack the basket and get to the rim, whatever it is, get him on the low block where he can get that turnaround shot. I want to establish him early. That to me, I think is going to be a primary focal point. Obviously, assuming the Georgia Tech coaching staff prepared for the game, they'll look at what Virginia did and they'll try to mimic it. I don't think they got the dudes to do to Vassar what Virginia was able to do to Vassar. So I want to be intentional about getting Big Henry back on track after his worst performance of the season last week in the win at UVA.
Yeah, you just want to see him fight back physically. I mean, he's going to be matched up a lot with Mohamed Sila. That's going to be the guy that I think he's got to be most aware of going into this game. But there'll also be times where he's matched up with Bayandongo. And so he's got to be able to handle more physicality than he was in the game against Virginia. That was the thing, was that there were moments where he was just being physically dominated on the defensive end of the floor. You want to see a little more resistance in that area. And then offensively, it's just about finishing the opportunities that you had. I thought he had some good looks in that game against Virginia. It's just the ball wasn't going in for him. And everybody is entitled to one of those types of nights. It happens to every single player, no matter who you are. You're going to see it. We've already seen it at times with Caleb Wilson, but there could be other games down the line where you see it with him. This is one of those games, though, where you just got to be able to bounce back and hopefully put together a performance that rivals some of the best that we've seen so far this year from Henry. I think this should be one of those games, as you said, maybe run some action there early for him to get him the ball. I mean, don't force it to him. You're not going to, be turning the ball over because you're so intent on getting him the basketball. If they're willing to give Caleb Wilson some good looks, then you're going to take that. But you just want to get him back to being confident that he can, find a way to score the basketball consistently. And maybe it is, by getting him a couple looks from beyond the arc. That's what's different about him than, some of the other big men that you've had here recently. You don't just necessarily have to give it to him on the block and let him go to work. So I'll be interested to see if that's something that Carolina does and is focused on early in the game. But regardless of what happens, I expect a bounce back performance from Henry in this game, even if it takes to the second half, like we've seen it do sometimes this season for him.
The last key to the game that I wrote down directly applies to what Georgia Tech does good, and that's rebound the ball. I mentioned they're top 5 in the league in rebounding at 39.1. Carolina is only 1 rebound per game better on paper. The Heels average 40.1 rebounds per game. Hubert talked about it in his presser leading up. Really stressed, completing possessions, getting defensive rebounds after you allow 34 offensive rebounds combined in the wins over Notre Dame and Virginia. the biggest reason why is the pace. If Georgia Tech can control the glass, they'll control the tempo. This is not a team that wants to run with Carolina. This is not a team that can handle Carolina being in the fast break and being with all their athleticism that they throw at you. And I do think, Carolina, that adjustment we saw last week in the Virginia game. I talked about this when I was on with Locked On with Isaac Shade, where you saw Jaron Stevenson running to the front of the rim. That was a switch in Carolina's transition offense, where they identified a weakness in Virginia and they attacked it. I think you're going to see more of that, mainly because I do think you've got two bigs in Vassar and Jaron Stevenson that can run to the front of the rim and get buckets. I get that we live in a time where the three is the more valuable shot, but twos count too. They add up at the end of the game. And I think Derek Dixon can see that look ahead pass that Kyan Evans can't make. Big reason why Carolina was able to get some easy buckets in that second half. But getting back to the rebounding, it's all about pace. In an ideal world, I think Georgia Tech would like to play this game 65-70. I think Carolina is more comfortable playing this game 75-80. You got to think this is number 2 offense in the country, according to Bart Torvik, since the calendar turned to 2026, because Carolina's been scoring routinely in the upper 80s and 90s. It's been the defense that has faltered them at times. So, it cannot be just Caleb Wilson. It cannot be just Henry Vassar. Jonathan Powell had 7 boards in the Virginia game. Can that show up? Can Derek Dixon, can he get to the glass? Can Luka Bogovic, whoever it is, everyone needs to impact the game. You're going up against a team that statistically matches up well with you, and you got to understand that rebounds equal pace. We want to play faster. The way we can accomplish that is have the ball more often than Georgia Tech does.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the main goals of this game, especially as you mentioned, with the fact that Georgia Tech, not a great scoring team, 74.5 a game. That's 231st in college basketball. So if this game is played in the 80s, in the 90s for Carolina, I find it hard to believe that Georgia Tech is going to be able to keep up. They just don't execute at that level on the offensive end of the floor. And so that should be what you want in the pace of this game. And you're right. In order to control that, you got to be able to control the glass. You've got to be able to either do that or create turnovers. And the one thing that I will say about this game is that this should be an area where Carolina can create more turnovers. 13.6 turnovers per game from Georgia Tech. That is 323rd in all of college basketball. So yeah, there might be some opportunities there, but let's say, it's been like a lot of of what the rest of the season has been like for Carolina, where they just can't really force a lot of turnovers. Well, then you have to turn to the glass. And so the good news is you look at Georgia Tech, offensive rebounding, they're 193rd in the country, average 11 a game. So very middle of the pack. That's not the area where they really dominate. They're much better on the defensive glass. I think Carolina will be able to get offensive rebounds, create some of those second chance points against Georgia Tech. We've never really felt like that's been an issue for Carolina. It's on the other end. You got to make sure this is not a game where you give Georgia Tech extra possessions. Don't give them extra easy looks because you're just not rebounding the way that you need to, or give them extra looks that eventually lead to guys open from beyond the arc and they get into a rhythm with their three-point shooting. That's something you also want to avoid in this game. So, the biggest thing, just avoid those second chance points in this game, because if you can win that area, then it feels like you're going to be able to win this game and probably win it pretty significantly.
Carolina enters the game with a 79.5% chance to win it. That's according to ESPN's analytics. And according to DraftKings, Carolina will enter the game as a 9.5-point favorite. The spread opened up at 9.5. It has remained at 9.5. So I'll let you go first with the game prediction. Who wins the game and why?
Yeah, I feel confident in this group, man. I mean, coming off of that game against Virginia, having a week off to sort of even correct some of the issues that they had in that game and in some of the games prior, I feel like this is going to be a group that's going to be motivated and ready to go. They know that this is the most important time of the year. Now you're getting to the stretch. I don't think we have another week. Maybe we do, but I don't think there's another week that you're going to see no games midweek. And so when you get to that point, that's where you start to turn up the intensity level and say, this is really the big time of the year, guys. This is where everything has to start to click. I think this is one of those games where Carolina is the more talented team. There's no doubt about that. But I think they're really going to be able to flex a little bit of muscle in this game. I think they're going to be motivated to show based off of what they did at Virginia that, that is something that carries over. I think you're going to see a bounce back performance from Henry Vassar. I expect a really strong day from him alongside of Caleb Wilson. I just don't see how Georgia Tech is going to be able to slow those guys down on the defensive end of the floor. They're not a great defensive team overall in terms of the points allowed. So I think those two will certainly be able to have their day. And then I think you'll see Carolina get something going on the perimeter too. I think we've seen some guys, especially, Luka Bogovac has been playing a little bit better here as of recently. We talked about Jaron Stevenson's big game against Virginia. Maybe he carries that over a little bit. Maybe this is one of Kyan Evans' good games. We're going to have to see. But I do think that defensively, you'll see Carolina bought in from the word go. I think they will have a pretty strong performance on that end of the floor. And that's the reason why I think they get a pretty comfortable win against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, this is one of those you betters, right? Like you go on the road, you lose this game. All the goodwill you built up from the Virginia win goes out the window. And it's going to lead to another uncomfortable conversation that none of us, quite frankly, want to have. I don't think that happens. I think Carolina found something in that second half, and not just from a X's and O's and a schematics thing. I think they found a toughness, a backbone that they had in the non-con season, but you had to redevelop it here in ACC play. Because you just don't go into that building and come back from 16 down. I refuse to believe that only you got to be some sort of special to go in there and do something like that. I don't know what this season ultimately holds. As Schubert Davis says, you got 2.5 months to write that story. But I do think Carolina's got something, and I think Carolina, even though they've had a week off, they'll be fresh. I think they'll be ready to get back out there and play and compete. It's Caleb Wilson back in his hometown. He'll be looking to put on a show, have a lot of family and friends that'll be in town. Even though it's a weird road venue, Carolina family always shows up strong in Atlanta. They'll have a nice contingent of Carolina fans at their backing as well. So I think Carolina gets their most, let's say, comfortable ACC road win so far this season. I think Carolina plays at a really high level to improve to 17-4 and get to 5-3 in the ACC. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. In the meantime, guys, we will encourage you to visit the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com, where coverage of the game canon will be found there tomorrow. Game preview will go up Saturday morning like they always do. We got a 2 p.m. tip. We will have a recap available for you tomorrow evening, as well as we continue to take you through the basketball season. Much more of a team effort this year with how much we have been traveling to and from games at different points. But we will have you covered with the game tomorrow, and then we'll get you ready for the game against Syracuse on Monday as we continue to take you through the basketball season. We're keeping you up to date with football. Kind of a quiet time right now. You do have the Senior Bowl that'll commence this week. Thaddeus Dixon among some of the Tar Heels that'll be in action down there in Mobile. Any significant news comes out of that, Anthony will have you covered, as well as any maybe late additions to the transfer portal or anything around the football team. We've got you covered. That's HeelToughBlog.com. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, just search the Four Corners Podcast and will pop up. There, we strongly encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any audio editions of the show throughout the remainder of the season. If you're a video consumer, the best way to keep up with us is follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog, subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow me on Twitter, HTB_Josh. Second we go live, you can jump in and be a part of our conversation talking Carolina basketball. With that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.